Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's REES webinar. My name is Josie Badger, and I am the project director for the National REES Center, which is funded by the RSA. We work to make sure that parent centers across the country are supporting youth with disabilities and their families in transition. We are here with my friends from the American Foundation for the Blind, and we are so excited to have you. So welcome. I will now turn it over to Miriam.
Welcome again, and I'm gonna show this slide to help you maneuver how to connect with our closed captioning. So to use closed captioning, click where it says CC, closed caption. And we also have interpretation to Spanish. We have Guillermo. Tenemos interpretación para el español. Y van a ver en la banda blanca o cinta negra un globo que indica interpretación. Hagan clic allí, luego seleccionan español y opriman donde dice Mute Original Audio. Esto último filtra completamente la presentación en inglés para que puedan escuchar con claridad a Guillermo. For the use of American Sign Language, we will pin the interpreter on our side, but you can do that. To pin the interpreter, hover over the video of the participant you want to pin and click. You will see 3 dots over the person you would like to join, and then just click there. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Hello, everyone. My name is William Rushell. I am the Director of Client Services for AFB Consulting, and we are here for our second session on talking about accessibility. I hope that you all were able to come to the first session or watch the recording of it, because we're going to be building on a lot of the concepts we talked about. The purpose of this presentation is to get a little bit more practical about accessibility, talking about kind of the high level things to be looking for, making it a little bit more real what accessibility actually looks like with regards to when somebody goes to your website who's using assistive technology, what are their experiences, what do we need to be looking for, that sort of thing. I want to be upfront that there is a lot of information in this presentation and there's a lot to the topic itself. So the goal is really is an introductory overlook of the topic, and hopefully we don't expect you to absorb all of this information, but we're hoping that this is a starting point that you can then go to use for your own exploration moving forward as you try to drive accessibility within your organization. So my name is William. I've got Syed with me as well, who is an excellent usability tester, a usability expert on our team. And we should have Matthew Janisauskas joining. And if you do see him, if you can make him a co-host so he can unmute as well. Matthew is our Chief Technology Officer and is going to help contribute to our discussion, because we want this to be a discussion. We recognize this information is dense, but we're going to try to break it up and provide some examples and keep it conversational. So let's first of all talk about the toolkit that we provided you. So this, hopefully you've had a chance to look through it. There were 3 things. We've got the basic testing guide, the procurement checklist, and the collected references. And if you haven't had a chance to look at this yet, I will quickly just show what we've got here. The accessibility testing guide is basically the content that we're about to present, but just in a more of a handout format. So we're going to talk about visual testing, and then keyboard testing, and then the screen reader testing, which is going to be the most probably the densest information we're going to talk about. So everything we're going to talk about today is distilled in this handout and can be used to help you guide along your testing journey. So take a look at this when you have time, and we're going to be bringing this up a few times. We have the opportunity to have a workshop together wherein you can bring what you're working on, and we will have some AFB experts, and we can have some conversations about specifically what your questions are moving forward after you have a chance to work with the material. And that's where I really think we're going to be able to convey the best the concepts the best in looking at what you're working on and working through some of that together and answering your questions directly. So those workshops, look for those, look for the invitation for those workshops. There will be a couple of opportunities there, and bring your questions. So we also added a procurement guide. So a lot of times, maybe you're not doing development yourself, and there's more to life than a website, which is what we're going to be, focused on. But if you're procuring internal tools, think about, your client relationship management, Salesforce, things like that, the tools that you need to make business run. This is a guide to help, ask questions of your vendors. If you're hiring someone to build your website for you, this is something that can help you think through some of those questions you should be thinking about. So the procurement guide, we're not going to be covering. This is something that we just we added because it's so important. But this is something that you can take and hopefully learn some tips for procurement. But we're going to be focusing on the testing side of it today. And then we've got a list of resources. So this is where, I said this is going to start your journey. This is where you can take your journey to the next step. So lots of different links to the various different resources that are out there. So one of the issues with accessibility is that there is so much information out there. And our goal today is try to distill it down into something that you can start with. And these guides can help you take the next step for all of the different particular branches that we need to go down for continuing accessibility. So we've got some checklists, some really great resources from other organizations as well, some thoughts on mobile, the guidelines for Apple and Android mobile applications as well, and some testing tools. So the checklist is where you can go to find more. It's some links we've curated. Like I said, there's a ton of information out there. Sometimes it can be difficult to make sense of it, and there's some varying quality out there as well. So these links should be very good and provide you with more information outside of the topics we're going to be talking about. So let's go ahead and start with probably the most boring part, which is the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. And the reason why we need to talk about this is not because we love talking about the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, or WCAG, but it is a common place to start. If you search web accessibility, eventually you will get here. And so if you want to know from start to finish what the W3C, the people that regulate standards on the internet, think makes an accessible website and accessible technology, this is it. It's very dense. It has a lot of jargon in it, but this is really where you go for, this is the book on accessibility that you can read through. And what WCAG does is, it is an excellent resource. It's very dense, but what it does is it breaks down accessibility into 4 principles: perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. And so for perceivable, if we're thinking about somebody who is not able to see or who has low vision, perceivable, can I perceive content on a page? Can I tell that something is there? And will my screen reader be able to pick that up and read it to me? So hopefully you are at least familiar with the basics of what a screen reader is. It is a tool that people can use to have content read to them and also interact with content on a computer, apps, and do input. That's how somebody who is blind or visually impaired will use a computer. And so this is really important for a screen reader, the perceivability. Operable is, can I interact with the website, for example, using my main mode of interaction? So maybe you use a mouse and keyboard, or maybe you're using a touch screen and just tapping on something because you're sighted and you have full uses of dexterity. But many people aren't. So people who can't use a mouse or who can't see the screen need to have an alternative method of interacting with a page. And so the operable principle says that you need to make sure that it works with screen readers, works with keyboard, works with alternative methods of interaction. Understandable is the content that I'm putting together, does it make sense? Does it have instructions? Is somebody able to make sense of this and not have to put in a huge, you're not burdening someone with too much information or information that's jumbled. And so understandable there's a lot of excellent principles here for making your content understandable, making sure that there are labels for content and that there are instructions when necessary. And then finally, the last principle is robust. And this is basically, when I write my code for my website, is it accurate or is it correct code? Is it valid HTML that I'm writing, for example? And so that ensures compatibility across browsers, across screen readers, and to make sure that everything works. So Robust has several guidelines within it to make sure that when you do write code or you create something, you're doing it in a repeatable, robust fashion. So that's what WCAG is. If you go look it up, if you do searches for web accessibility, you will eventually get there. But that's not really where we want to start. So this is the last we're going to talk about WCAG, but it is important that you know it exists. It is a resource that you will need to be familiar with if you're going to become a web accessibility expert, but it's not where we're going to start to keep things practical. So testing for accessibility, that's the topic today. So there are two different types of accessibility testing, or for our purposes, there's two different types of accessibility testing. There is automated testing. Automated testing requires less experience. This is like a program that you can run on your website that provides you with a report that says, here are some problems that I found, here are some potential fixes, and it's really convenient and runs very quickly. Unfortunately, these automated tests only find 20 to 30% of the total issues that you're going to have. So it's going to be the low-hanging fruit. And so this is important. Automated testing is important, especially if you're getting started, but understanding the limitations is absolutely critical. Automated testing does not test full workflows. It just tests a page. So for example, if you've got multiple steps to fill out a registration form, for example, it's going to test one step at a time. It's not going to be able to go through the whole process to see if it's usable. So the other type of testing is manual testing, and this requires more experience. You don't have to be an expert to start doing manual testing, but you do need to have more experience and understand a little bit more what's going on rather than just clicking a button for an automated test. And obviously it has to be done manually. So it's something that you need to plan for and allocate resources to do. But it is the only way to reliably predict whether or not something is actually usable, which is what we care about. We care whether or not someone can use it. We really honestly don't care if something is WCAG compliant because we care more whether or not somebody can get something done. We want to know whether or not somebody can register on our registration form. We don't really care if our registration form is perfectly compliant. We do care at some point, but that's not where we want to start. So manual testing is important. We recommend doing both, and we're going to be focusing on manual testing today. But some automated testing tools you may have heard of, we've got links to these as well. The Axe Dev Tools, Lighthouse on Chrome, Wave from WebAIM, and a new tool which is cool. It's called accessibilityinsights.io. This is from Microsoft, and it does some guided testing as well and kind of integrates a little bit of manual testing too. So these are some links that you can explore. An example of what it would look like. So if you run the Axe Dev Tool checker here, I've got the page on the top, and then it just runs in the browser. You can click the scan button, and you're going to get an output that looks like this. So on this page, which had, intentionally had some accessibility issues on it, here the tester is, or the checker says we've got 51 total issues, 37 of them are critical. And it's going to give you some information about it, like images must have alternative text, form elements must have labels. And so these are all issues that should be addressed. And so you get a nice output. It's going to push you in the right direction as far as where your problems actually are. And so it's nice. It's a nice thing to do. And this is a place where you can get started doing some testing. But we always caution people, you can go very wrong if you focus on automated testing too much, because it can, if you run an automated test and you get back some crazy number of issues, that can really affect the way that you prioritize things. So again, automated testing is something that you can follow some of those links, try out some of those tools, but be careful about focusing too much on it because we want to make sure that products are usable. Okay, so moving into manual testing. We've got 3 testing checkpoints. So if we think about, last week we talked about people with different types of disabilities, the kinds of assistive technology they use, and really these 3 checkpoints will help us verify that somebody who's using a screen reader can access your website, somebody who's using a keyboard can access your website, and somebody who has visual impairments can as well. But it's also going to kind of branch out further than just those, because keyboard accessibility is so important for so much. And these checkpoints are going to cover the vast majority of accessibility problems that you're going to run across. So that's why we're focusing here to try to distill it down into these 3 checkpoints. All right, I'm just going to breathe for a second here while we talk about contrast and text size. Visual design is very important. We want to have beautiful products. We want to have pages that are really attractive looking. And for the most part, good design is inclusive in general. So something that's designed well is going to be easy to use, easy to read. It's going to be easy to read in multiple different locations. So for example, if you think about if you've got a web page that you're expecting someone to be viewing on their phone, they're going to maybe be on their phone outside. And so you want your page to be applicable in the most number of situations, but that also helps people with visual impairments. So the contrast text size is really important for that. And the technical requirement, there's something called contrast ratio, which is 4 point, it's just a number. And you can compute contrast ratio. I've got a tool for that in the next slide. But basically 4.5 to 1 is the contrast ratio. 1 is the minimum contrast you want for regular text. For large text, you can have slightly lower contrast. UI elements, you want to have sufficient contrast as well. But basically, you want to use larger text and higher contrast whenever is possible. And a good designer will know that I can use, this is really important information, therefore I'm going to use larger text. I'm going to guide people, guide their eye to make sure that it works and they consume the information the way that I want it to be. And I can use contrast and text size to help do that. And always pushing for sufficient contrast is the best way to make sure that this works in a repeatable way. And there are some numbers that you can use, 4.5 to 1, 3.0 to 1, but I always like to say, you can trust your eyes for this as well. If something looks low contrast, it probably is. And so think about that as you go through and maybe choose your colors, or if you're working with the designer, make sure they're aware of these requirements, and then they can work with you on it. So checking contrast is really easy. Basically, if you're using HTML, you'll have a hex code. You can put the foreground and the background color in a contrast checker, and it's going to spit out a number. And this one, blue and white has a contrast ratio of 8.51, 8.59 to 1, and passes all of the requirements for contrast. And so this would be great. So you can check your colors pretty easily as you work on designing a new page. So this is the same slide from last week. Color is also really important. So you can use color as much as you'd like, but color can't be the only thing conveying information on in an image or on a page. So for example, if I were to have a line chart with 4 different lines on it, and the only thing distinguishing those lines is color, if you make those lines in black and white, or remove the color information from it, so somebody that's colorblind, for example, or if you printed out a line chart, these lines become very difficult to distinguish. But if you have color plus some other kind of visual distinguishing information, so shapes or textures, when you print that out, you can actually still tell the difference. So on the right side, I've got the colors plus shapes for each data point, and you can definitely tell the difference between each of these lines, even after you remove the color information from it. So the other thing that is very important as far as visual design is responsive web design. And so this became a big trend when mobile web took over and is the way most people consume websites these days. So having a desktop website that looks great, but then you view the same web page on a mobile browser, that's also really important. So I've actually got a demonstration here. So if I zoom into this on my browser, if you're not aware, you can hold Control and use the scroll wheel to zoom into something. This is afb.org. This is our website. And you can see that as I zoom into it, it goes into the mobile version. So it's responsive, and it responds to the level of zoom that I pick. And so now the text is much bigger. And so somebody who wanted to have that text bigger would be able to see it. But one thing that can happen if you don't have a responsive page, it'll still zoom in, but if you have to start, if it zooms in and content starts being pushed off the page to the side, or you have horizontal scroll bars, or even worse, in some cases, you can have content that just isn't accessible anywhere because it's scrolled off the page and there isn't a horizontal scroll bar. Those are all issues. So if you go in, just, go into the responsive mode for your site and see how things work. See how the page reflows and how it restructures itself, and make sure that it still makes sense, that the information is still all on the page. And then you not only have a great mobile web page, but you've made it accessible to somebody that wants to increase the size on desktop as well. So another example that we have here is the Raise Center. So here's this might be the old site, I'm sorry, but it reflowed really well, so I decided to grab a screenshot. So here's the desktop mode, and here's the mobile mode. So it stacks things in a column, and it works really well. So that is another example of content reflowing correctly. So that's what we have for visual design. Contrast, text size, ensuring that you're not using color, and make sure that things reflow so that when you zoom in on it, it still makes sense, and it's still, the content is still all available. So keyboard testing is pretty simple as well. You might have done some of this a little bit on your own, maybe without even knowing it, but you should be able to access everything on a page just with a keyboard. And in this accessibility testing guide, we kind of go through this a little bit with the testing procedure. But basically what we're doing is we've got some keyboard commands that we're going to be looking at. We've got the tab and the shift tab keys, which are going to move the focus forward and backwards on the page. Okay, so keyboard focus is really important. Every element on your page that receives or that is interactive can receive keyboard focus. So for example, a link. If you can click on a link, the keyboard should be able, or you should be able to focus on it with the tab key. Same with all of your input fields. So your form fields, your buttons, all of that should be focusable with the keyboard. Menus, all of that receives keyboard focus. So keyboard focus only focuses on the interactive elements, and that's separate. That's a little bit different from the way that a screen reader works, and Syed will talk about that in a second. But so tab and shift tab is how we navigate through a page, through the interactive parts of the page. Spacebar will activate an element. And so if you hover on a link with the keyboard, or if you activate a link with the keyboard and then press the spacebar, it's going to activate that link and take you to that page. Enter is very similar to the way spacebar works, but enter will often submit a form as well. So if you are filling out a form and you press the enter key, it probably will submit the form. So what I recommend is when you're doing your testing, try spacebar first. If you're trying to activate a control or click a link or something like that, try spacebar first. If that doesn't work, you can try the enter key. Because if you're actually filling out a form, you might accidentally submit it. And then the arrow keys, will navigate through the page. But then if you're focused on an element, sometimes the arrow keys will actually change a value. So for example, radio buttons, we'll see that in a demo we've got a little bit later. Focus on the radio buttons and press the arrow keys to change the value, or a combo box. Use the arrow keys for that. So here's what we're going to be looking for with our keyboard testing. Every element has a visible focus indicator. So you have to know where your keyboard focus is, and sometimes elements don't have a visible focus indicator. We're going to check for a logical focus order. So if I start at the top of the page and the focus goes down to the bottom of the page, then all the way back up to the top of the page, that's not going to make a lot of sense and will be really annoying. So we want to make sure the order makes sense. And then we're just going to try to interact with everything on the page. So if we have buttons, if we have links, try to click them, try to press the buttons, try to get into the menus. So that's all we're doing for keyboard testing. It's pretty simple. So I'm back to afb.org. So I'm just going to go to the top of the page here and press the tab key. So on our page, we've got something called a skip link. A little skip to content link button shows up. And this is actually really nice. It's the first thing on the element, or it's the first thing on the page. And if I press this button, it's going to skip over all of the header information. It's going to skip over the navigation stuff and take me right to the content on the page. And that's really nice for keyboard users. But for testing, all I'm going to do is press tab And now we can see that I've got a focus indicator around the AFB logo. So if I press spacebar, then it will click the logo, which goes back to the home page. So tabbing again, now we've got on the font size change indicator, tab, and now we're in the search box, tab on search again, and now tab into donate. So all of this is, we had a visible focus indicator. The order made sense as we were moving through it. And I haven't tried to activate any of it, but I know that it will work. So now we tab, and one thing that happens on our page is as you tab through these menus, they automatically open. So menus can work in a couple of different ways, but our menus we chose to have automatically open as I tab through here. So I can get through all of the different menu items and go through the page like this. So everything looks good, tabbing through here. And so far I have seen that every element that I visited has had this visible focus indicator. And sometimes it's the focus is indicated through just a change in color, but it should be very obvious where my focus is, and I haven't lost it. The focus order has made sense, and everything that I've interacted with so far has worked. And so I can go into this form field here, type in my name, and then that is all functioning with the keyboard. So that's all we're doing for keyboard testing. The thing is, you can't cheat. You can't accidentally use the mouse to navigate to a certain area. So when you are doing this testing, maybe move your mouse off your desk to remove the temptation, or just be very aware that you can't use a mouse, because if you have to cheat to do something, then you still have a problem. So keyboard testing, something that you can do. It's very simple, should be pretty intuitive. You don't need any special software to make that happen either. You can just start doing testing and be pretty successful. And this really is going to find a lot of accessibility problems. If you start experiencing weird things with the keyboard, you know that you're also going to be impacting the screen reader user and anybody that's using switches as well. So for screen reader testing, I'm going to hand this over to Syed in a second, but all we're doing with the screen reader is adding on speech output as well. So it's just like testing with the keyboard. The procedures are the same or very similar, but we've got a couple of extra commands that we can do. There's a couple of extra things we're looking for to make sure that the screen reader is reading. And every time you press a key, every time you press the down arrow, for example, the screen reader is going to speak something. And that is really important, that what the screen reader speaks matches what's on the page and makes sense in context as well. So I'm going to turn this over to Syed to tell us about screen reader testing. He is our tester, has seen hundreds of pages and has some pretty interesting insight. And yeah, Syed, I'm just turning this over to you.
Thank you, William. Hello, everyone. My name is Syed Hassan. As an expert screen reader tester, my goal is basically to look through the interface and try to find issues that I can find. So what I try to do is basically, I have different methods. The very first thing I try to do if I'm trying to test for a website is I will always go to the top of the page or interface, and I will just navigate through with the down arrow keys just to understand the interface and see what's there. When I'm doing that, my main goal is to basically get through each element on the page and make sure that each and every element has a accessible name/label associated with them. So elements like images, buttons, or form fields, you want to make sure that the labels are interpreted correctly by the screen reader, and I'm not hearing anything like unlabeled or blank. So if I do hear these things, my goal is to report these two issues. And okay, so for example, images, because as you know, screen reader needs an alternative way to describe an image, because Otherwise, screen reader will not be able to know what's on there. So this label, alternative text, basically provides a way of, accessible way of, like, you're describing an image in a way that when the screen reader goes over an image, that particular label will have the description of the image, and that image description will be read out aloud to the screen reader user. So as you can see on this slide, there is an image. And it basically is a pill bottle, and it has a diagram at the lid. So the Alterac description says, push the cap down, turn it counterclockwise from left to right. It tells me that, that's a description of a pill bottle with, and that's how you open it. So that's a nice way to do it. And there's also very handy resource by W3C. It's called the decision tree. Basically, it tells you, what is alternative text and where should you use it. So because you want to make sure that that you only using alternative text for images that are important and are there for users' attention, because not all images need alternative text. Images such as decorative and presentational images, you don't need alternative text for that. So that's a very useful resource which you can check it out and see what goes into the alternative text. Okay, moving forward. Okay, so button controls, you want to make sure that they have a proper name associated with them. Because what normally happens is that when a screen reader user navigates to a button control or any element that is that is an interactive element, we want to understand that the label should be basically meaningful. So you don't want to only use the literal labels. You want to also use the action. They should not only be literal but action oriented. So for example, here's a nice table here. You have 2 columns and 5 rows on this table. The very first column says literal, unhelpful, and the second column has a label action oriented. So the very first row, magnifying glass, that doesn't tell me anything, but if it has a label associated, like keyword search in there, then it does help me understand what the button is doing. So similarly, I'm just going to go navigate to the other one. Diagonal, it doesn't tell me anything, but if it has a label expand or full screen, that's really helpful. And down arrow, again, no idea as a screen reader user what it's going to do, but expand is helpful. A label expand along with it, it's helpful. And finally, the last element is up arrow. Again, that's no idea what's going to do, but yeah, but navigate to the top, that's helpful. So as you can see that, only relying on, good label is also helpful for a screen reader users to understand what performance, what action is going to perform when you activate that particular control.
Yeah, that's, and thinking about verbs specifically for buttons, and some buttons, some design languages have actual text like on the buttons as well. So another thing you could think of is if you're using an icon or an image for a button, think about if you were to replace the icon with the text, what text would you put there instead? And you're going to use a verb. It's going to be action oriented. It's going to describe what's going to happen.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And we often see, labels, icons are associated with the buttons, but they don't have that meaningful alternative text to them. So if they do have available, then it's helpful. Okay, moving on. Form fields. We want to make sure that we have a label for the visual label present for the form field, because you can only you don't only want to rely on the the placeholder text for an edit field or form field. Visual label should be always present. So as you can see on this there's an image and it has an edit field and it says edit text. It is helpful, edit text, but it's not gonna, it doesn't tell me, like if it's a address field, it receives in text input, but it is not helpful because I can put my name, my address, or other information, but if it does not have the label, then it's very ambiguous for me, because I'm fully relying on the screen reader to tell me what's there. So if it's not present, then it's not good.
And we're skipping over the technical part of how you would do this, but in code, even if you have a label there that's present, they also have to be associated properly using like correct HTML markup. And there's lots of ways you can look up how to do that. But there should be a visible label that's associated with an edit text, and those two elements should be associated so that when you enter in to one of these edit text fields, you get the label as well. So what you input into it plus the label. So that's all that needs to be here is just describing what that input field is. A problem would be you go to an edit text or an input field and it just says input field and you have no idea why, what you're supposed to be inputting. So
by the way, and by the way, I did encounter this this afternoon when I was registering for this webinar, that there was this combo box for the state. As soon as they tabbed into it, it was announced combo box. I had to literally use my second technique, which is like using the arrow keys to see where if there was a label available. So I found out that there was a label present, but it wasn't associated with that particular control. So I was, yeah, it took me for a surprise. Okay, so on this next slide, there's a video. And basically it's about like, what happens when you find a label field. So I'm going to ask William to play that for us. So William, if you can.
Should be,
there
we go.
So here we're taking a look at some form fields that are working properly on the City Lights survey.
Form favorite park grouping, none, radio button not checked. Radio button not checked, Central Park. Radio button not checked, Grand Park.
So we get radio button and then the label that the radio button has with it. So the name and the role are identified as well as the status. And we'll switch over to one that isn't working properly.
Welcome to column 3, radio blank.
So here we are with a set of form fields that are not working correctly.
Row 3, column 1, radio button not checked, blank. Radio button not checked, blank.
So instead of getting the name or any other relevant information, all we get is radio button not checked, blank.
So, yep, as you have seen, a lot of guessing for a screen reader user when there is no label present. Another very important thing when doing screen reader testing is checking if the if the focus, if the orders, if the things are in proper focus order. So basically, for that, I want to make sure that everything is focusable and it's follow the a logical order. So for that, what I normally do is I always go to the top of the page and use the tab key to make sure that all the elements that I have seen before with the arrow keys, now I can focus with the tab key and make sure that the focus is going logically. The key thing here is to make sure that your focus is moving in a logical way. Like it should move. It should not move in a random place as such. You're navigating at the top of the page, and you're just browsing through the menu items, and suddenly you tab and your focus goes jumps directly into the footer or in the middle of the page. That's a problem. We want to avoid that. So we want to make sure that the focus goes in a logical way, and we are able to focus everything. It is important for especially interactive elements. So if the focus is jumping around like that, there might be a situation where some interactive elements lose focus or did not never get focus, and then you have to find a different method to get to those things. So okay. Okay, so I think I'm going to ask William to describe. There's a column, not a column, what I'm saying, there's a table, so I'm gonna ask him to
Yeah.
describe for us. Thanks.
Yeah, so on the actually on this slide, we've got a diagram with, you know, it's a form, and the form is laid out in 2 columns and 2 sections. And the first section is in 2-column layout. The second section is in 1 column. And a lot of forms are logically visually laid out in this format, and that's the best way to actually, that's the most usable way to do it. But if the focus order isn't working correctly and you go like top to or left to right, top to bottom, you would skip from like field 1 to field 4, back down to field 2, and then field 5, and that would not make much sense. So visually, we know that we want to go down and then across and then down all the way. But this focus order for both the keyboard and the screen reader should match this as well. So another example that Syed was alluding to is we got a grid here, a 3x2 grid of cards. The cards just have some content in it. And across the first row, we've got card 1, card 2, card 3. And the second row is card 4, card 5, card 6. And I think the issue that Syed was telling me about earlier was there was a grid of articles that were part of a page, and the articles were aligned chronologically. And so card 1 was the most recent, card 2 was the next most recent, card 3. So that made sense. But what was happening for him is his focus was going down the page. So he went from card 1 to card 4 to card 9 or card 7. And he didn't really understand why we were going from March to September up to April, where I saw that we were going from, you know, March, April, May in the correct chronological order. So that's another case where it's really important to make sure that the focus order for both the interactive elements like form fields, but also just the content on the page is laid out with the correct focus order. And sometimes it looks fine, but when you test it with a screen reader, it's not. So that was one thing that we had noticed we were going to talk about. And we've got the next slide, which is about modals, which we also find a lot of problems with. I'm just going to go ahead and play this video for time because we've got a lot to get through.
Sure.
I think the video speaks for itself. So let's do that.
Here we're taking a look at a feedback form and the way that incorrect or unexpected focus order can have an impact on the user experience, and in some cases, many cases, render it totally inaccessible. So this is an example page for a feedback form, and I know that if I click this button here, it will open the feedback form over to the side. So I'm going to do that just with my mouse. So the feedback form is now open, and I can click around, and if I click out of here, it'll close, and I can fill in the form as is, and then click send feedback, and it all is pretty intuitive. But if I try to do that with the keyboard alone or with the screen reader, the focus order does not make sense. And so I'm going to go ahead and turn on NVDA.
Main.
One moment.
Exit. Feedback form graphic.
Okay, so I've got, there's other accessibility issues on this page as well, but I've moved to the feedback form itself, and I'm going to go ahead and activate it by pressing the enter key. So now it's opened, and I can now move around, navigate, pressing the tab key and the arrow keys with my screen reader to look around, and it looks as if I'm exactly where I left my focus. It did not take me to the feedback form, so I'll do that for a second.
Main link graphic float pop-up. Link graphic exit pop-up. So
as you can possibly see, the focus is actually behind this modal form now, and it has not taken me to it. So it's virtually invisible to a screen reader user, and for a keyboard user, it'd be very frustrating because focus has not been directed there. So this is an unexpected and incorrect focus order. This element is actually at the very bottom of the page. So if I go all the way down to the bottom of the page, I can get to this feedback form, but that is not something that a user would know to do and is really confusing.
All right. Yeah. So as you have seen, we often see that kind of problem, and I believe the ideal, experience would have been that as soon as you trigger the modal, the focus is set within the modal until the user, finish whatever the user is doing. When the modal is dismissed, the focus is brought back to the control that triggered the modal, but it didn't happen this time around. So. Moving on to the next slide, I think we have another very important thing to consider while testing for screen reader accessibility is page structure, which makes up headings. You want to make sure the headings are recognized as headings when they are present on the page, and they're logically arranged in a normal way, and because screen readers often use these structural elements to navigate through the different section of the page, and which help them navigate faster and quicker rather than using the arrow keys and tabbing around, which takes a lot of time. So
just like you do visually, like
exactly. Yep.
Visual headings help mark different places on the page, and you can quickly scan through headings. And the same thing with the heading for a screen reader user.
Yep. So they should be the key things to consider. They should be logical because they provide meaningful structure to the page. They should be short. You don't want to have a heading of a full sentence of heading. That's not good. They should be short, meaningful, and they should be logically nested. So there's a structure here where heading level 1 is a page title, and you have heading level 2, which is like a sub-concept of heading level 1, and then heading level 3, a subsection of heading level 2. So you just want to make sure that it follows the logic. And we often see when we are editing, like when doing audits, that sometimes headings are missing completely, and sometimes they jump from 1 to 3 and 4 and 5, and logically doesn't make any sense. So yeah, it's not it's not helpful for our screen reader users to see that. Okay, moving forward. And one more thing, I think we often tell them to our clients that headings should be true headings. They should not be just visually used visual font styles that appear to be headings. We want to use true headings, true HTML heading that will be recognized by the screen reader. Okay, another component that makes the page structure is landmarks and regions. So just like headings, regions and landmarks define a purpose or section of a page. So HTML5, you call them semantic elements, and once these semantic elements are present on the page, the screen reader user can very quickly go to them and see what's there. And these consist of things like there's a diagram on the page of a page, and that basically breaks down these components into header. You have a nav. There's a section on the page, you have an article, a side, and a footer. Once these semantic elements are present, the screen reader user can now quickly navigate to them. So there's on the next slide, there's a video how how a screen reader user will interact with these elements, and I would like to ask William to play that for us so we can see what's going on.
The guy.
Here's an example of a good page that is set up and structurally semantic, like we've been talking about. It's an article from our magazine Access World that has headings and regions and all of the different elements that we would like to help make navigating faster. So I can navigate by heading by pressing the H key.
A guide to using mobile check deposit and some helpful accessories. Heading level 1. Main landmark. Preparing the check. Heading level 2. Scanning the check. Heading level 2.
So you can hear that I go between headings and it tells me the heading level as well. So I can scan through all the different headings in this article. But I can also use regions or landmarks as well. And this is not necessarily content. These are sections of the page that are marked up and labeled that will let you navigate between different areas. So things like the navigation and the footer and those different areas can be marked up so that I can use a key to navigate directly to those different regions. And the key is actually D within VDA. So I'm going to go ahead and press Shift D to go back up through some of the regions so you can hear them.
Navigation landmark breadcrumb. Landmark navigation landmark list with 6 items about AFB visited link. Form search.
So just with those, we saw that we jumped to the breadcrumb navigation and then the main navigation of the site and then up to the search box. And so I can go between different sections of the page using regions that are labeled that tell me what's going on.
Yeah, so these semantic elements, once, as you have seen, when they're present, they make navigation much easier for a screen reader user. One thing we often hear from our users or clients that what if someone is not a screen reader user, how should one go about using a screen reader? Because sometimes it's hard to understand the screen reader speech. So I think there is a very handy feature that is available under the screen reader setting is a speech viewer. So once that is enabled, you will hear the speech in a text format, which is very helpful for a sighted person who never uses the screen reader or haven't seen before. So it really helps you understand what the screen reader is, reading out loud to you.
It's basically like closed captions for the screen reader and can be pretty helpful.
Yeah.
But
so, yeah.
another thing is, sometimes when people hear speech, the voice doesn't sound very good, or it sounds super slow, and so they wonder how could you use a web page? And an actual screen reader user, Syed, his voice is set totally different. He's got it customized, and it speaks, at 500 words per minute. So he listens to it very, very fast. But you can definitely tell if you have to listen to everything on the page, having that semantic structure makes it really, really makes navigating pages so much easier and is really critical.
That's all for me. Yep.
Oh, go ahead, Syed. Did you have something?
No, I just want to say that's it for me, and over to you.
All right, so with the last 9 minutes, we've got 9 more minutes of presentation, and then I think we can do Q&A. A lot of questions. We'd love to answer them. We know that this is so much content and so little time. So again, we're just trying to sample and expose you to the concepts, not make you experts right now. But one way we can do that is by looking at some common components and kind of breaking it down. And maybe if you have some of these components that you're curious about, we can discuss that in the Q&A. But one is menus. Every site has a menu, and this is one of the most common things that we have to sort through. So this is a screenshot of it's actually the mega menu widget, which is fairly partially accessible. There are parts that don't work very well, but you can use this and be successful. But that's not the point. A mega menu, is something where you've got a collapsed in desktop mode, it's collapsed, and you can hover over these items and you get these flyouts and stuff. And then when you open it up, this is what it looks like with the flyouts. And so if you think about using this with a keyboard, when you tab into these, where does your keyboard focus go? Like I tab to the menu item and then I open it. Where does my keyboard focus go next? Does it go to widgets or does it go down to getting started? And so we want to be thinking about, keyboard focus and each one of these elements. So we see that we've got these little icons and stuff. Is this important information? Do these little icons need to have alt text? Let's think, this shopping cart icon. I know because I've shopped online before that this is a shopping cart icon, and that little 0 means that I've got 0 items in my cart. But does this button actually have the alternative text on that to say shopping cart, 0 items in your cart? Or does it just say, shopping cart or even nothing? And here, this is a phone icon. I know that this is probably shouldn't say phone icon. It should probably say make a call or call us or contact us, something like that. And again, one of those magnifying glasses, which should probably be search. So with a menu like this, each one of these items across the top needs to have a good alternative or needs to have a good name. So when I go to it, it should say, menu items, widgets, images, image swap, flyout, the actual icons. And if it wasn't speaking those things, that would be a problem. But then the focus order should make sense. And this should also be structural as well. So you can use list markup. These could be headings. There's all sorts of things that we can be thinking about with these components. But one of the other issues that we usually have is when you go into like a mobile version of the menu, thinking about, when that expands, sometimes the menus slide over. And you can still get to the content behind the menu, even though the menu is visually obscuring everything. So when you don't have the correct focus order with the menu as well, that can be a problem. So really what we're looking for a menu, every time I go to one of the links, I get the full context for what should be in there. So it says menu items or shopping cart or whatever the link is. When I open up one of those, open up the menu, it should take me to what was opened up. I shouldn't have to go searching around for that. And when I tab through everything, it should make sense. And so that's really all we're looking for the menu. Another one that we have that is typically a problem is carousels. Carousels can be accessible, but they aren't always the most usable. So what a carousel does is it's got rotating content, or it's a slideshow, for example. So this is something you might have on your front page, and it would cycle through content through slides or whatever for recent announcements. These are really popular, and unfortunately, a lot of times they have significant usability problems, because think of all of the different things that is going on with this. First of all, we've got all of these buttons that need to be labeled appropriately, which oftentimes there aren't. But then we've got this pager element down at the bottom that also needs to function. So I need to be able to change the page and make sure that I can still get to this content in each one of these carousel items. So basically, it makes content, if you use one of these, it makes using it, if you're a keyboard user or if you're a screen reader user, basically hides the content and makes you search for it. So carousels can be a problem, and carousels come in like so many different varieties that each one of these different varieties needs to be checked to make sure it works. If it does work, if it is fully accessible, which it can be, there are a few implementations of carousels that work. You have to make sure that the particular version that you're choosing and the way that you implement it on a page also works. So carousels, we tend to avoid. Menus, obviously, you're going to have a menu on your page, but thinking really critically about what your menu needs to do. Should I shove all of it into a mega menu, or should I simplify my menu structure and make it so that people have to click through a couple of times? Those are some of the decisions you can make to make your content more usable as you're developing it. So what do we do when we find a problem? So you did some testing, you decided, oh, okay, so I'm trying to use the keyboard to open my menu and it doesn't work. Apologies for the leaf blower outside. So I've got a menu item that I can't find, or a button that's not labeled properly. So we can do a couple of things. So assuming you're using WordPress or one of the other CMS systems out there, there are going to, all of the different plugins you choose, all the themes, they're going to have some options. And what you can do is you can just start playing with those options. Maybe, for example, one layout for the menu doesn't work, but there's a simplified layout that the menu plugin provides that you can test out. Or, you're using a carousel plugin and the first one doesn't work very well. Maybe there's a couple of different layouts you can try. So a lot of the times, just playing with the plugins that you currently have, if you decide or determine that they aren't accessible, can make improvements. And what you're looking for, what we would want, is for you to be looking for incremental improvements as you work on your accessibility journey. So even if you can just solve the problem or make it better, that's an improvement and something that you should do. Maybe it's still not perfect, but if you can find an option, tweak something in the settings that makes it better, then that's a success. And in some cases, the grid layout that we were using for that chronological newsletter page, it wasn't working. So maybe you could switch to just a list. So it's a single column. It's not exactly what you were envisioning, but it is much more accessible and inclusive for people. And so therefore it's a better choice. And this, of course, is assuming that you aren't building it yourself and you can't implement code changes yourself. So cost is always a factor, and so we want to do what you can do, and sometimes you have to make compromises if you don't have the funding to have a developer come in and remediate it for you. But if you do find a bug with a plugin that you have acquired somehow, you should file a report. You should tell the vendor, hey, I found this accessibility problem. It would be great if you fixed it. It would help everybody that's using your plugin have a more accessible website. A lot of times you can get a good response from vendors in that way, especially if you can provide them with replication steps. You can say specifically what's happening is when I go to this menu and I open the menu, it doesn't put my focus at the menu and you can focus on stuff behind it. Whatever you can do to get as specific as possible for these vendors, a lot of them will fix these problems. And of course, if that doesn't work, sometimes you have to find a different solution altogether. And find a different plugin, find a different theme, whatever you need to do to make it work, because accessibility is a priority. If you have the funding for it, you can work with a third party. So we're AFB Consulting. We work with a lot of companies, and we have in the past provided solutions to help make websites better. So sometimes you can do little JavaScript hacks or things like that to fix what you have. Or the best way to do it, if you're developing a new website, is bring in and make sure your designers understand accessibility, or have your designers work with an agency like AFB to, from the beginning, make sure that the sites you're designing or implementing are accessible. And so third-party experts are the best way that you can ensure that you're getting good perspectives, you're getting professional opinions on whether or not something is accessible, and you can be really confident in ensuring that it is. So those are some strategies that you can look into.
And one more thing, William.
Yeah.
I think nowadays a lot of developers, they use accessibility tag when they are providing their components, such as on WordPress CMS. So you look for those tags and see if they're if they have that accessibility label associated with them. So
that is an awesome point, and we mentioned that in the first one. But when you are looking for plugins, read the documentation and see if accessibility is mentioned. And if it is, that's a good sign. If it's not, then you might need to do a little bit more research. If you haven't chosen a plugin yet, you can make accessibility a priority. Thank you, Syed. That's an excellent point. So what is next on our list here? So review the toolkit and your testing strategy. We're going to be doing some workshops, and we want you to come. That's where really we're going to be the most value to you, is we can work directly with what you're working on, help provide you some perspective exactly on the issues that you're facing. But if you review the toolkit, review the testing guide before you come, then we can get really detailed and hopefully help you find some solutions and help you think like we think about accessibility. And I think that could be extremely valuable. We're going to have 2 workshop opportunities, and I think Josie probably has some information on this. I'm not sure exactly when they're going to be scheduled, but hopefully we can get them scheduled soon, to come and work with AFB experts directly on whatever you're working on. And we would prefer that you actually come with something that you're working on. So if you've got a website we can take a look at, we'll look at it together, we'll walk you through it, and we'll show you what we find. So that would be, I think that is, in our experience, that's the best way to actually make progress on things like accessibility, and the best way that we can teach accessibility and empathy and all of the other things that go into it. Because it is complex. There's a lot. There's a lot that goes into this, but we think that when you actually see it in action on your own site, it starts to click. So that's all of the content that we have prepared. It was a lot. Appreciate your patience as we got through it. And I hope we have some questions. I know we've got Matthew in the room now who can field some questions. I don't know, Matthew, if you have any specific thoughts, please interrupt me. But we can dive directly into questions, and we really appreciate doing this and hope that it has been helpful.
Thank you all so very, very much. And so at this point, please use the chat box or the Q&A at the bottom for any questions that you might have. I have a feeling there's a lot going on in all your minds right now because a lot was shared.
And this is Johan Josie. So hi, everyone. And I just wanted to thank William and Saeed for the presentation. And Matthew, if you can unmute yourself, and the participants are allowed to unmute themselves. I do have questions that were asked earlier in the chat.
Great.
So I'll take this moment to plug those questions in here. And that will give everyone who does have a question to ask either time to type or time to think about how they wish to ask it. So the first question we have in the chat for today was from Destiny L. I had a question that piggybacked from last week. When it comes to alt text for photos, is it better with as much descriptive text as possible, or keeping it simple and straight to the point?
Awesome question. I think the best thing we can do is point you to that that resource from the W3C, the decision tree, because it depends on the context, and it depends a lot on the context. So, for example, say you are a marketing person for a new drug, and you want to publish information, and you've got a chart. And the chart has data in it that is important. You want to go into a lot of detail on what's in that chart. If you're a marketing person for charting software and you just have a chart that's part of a stock image that you want to describe, the data isn't important at all inside of that chart, and therefore you're going to use a different strategy for marking that up. So it is contextual. You want to provide all of the relevant information for the message you're trying to convey. You don't want to be super literal, because that wastes everybody's time. But again, you don't want to leave out important information that would help somebody understand why you put that image there.
Thank you, William. And the resource that he just noted within the slides, which will be shared and also pasted once again in the chat for who asked the question. The next question here, there are questions coming into the chat, so I'm just moving back up to my spot. And here we go. When using the screen reader and using the tab button to move through the page, should the movement be paired with a visual line or color, as well as the appearance of the name of where you are?
So when you press the tab key on a page, when you're running a screen reader or when you're not running a screen reader, you are going to have the same effect. Basically, it's just the screen reader will speak what's happening as you go. So you press the tab key, it's going to take you to the next link, it's going to take you to the next button, it's going to take you to the next interactive element. The screen reader takes care of everything at that point. All you need to do is make sure that you're doing everything you should for keyboard accessibility, and you have labels for your buttons and that sort of thing. The point of a screen reader is to provide the user with additional information as the user wants it. And so the screen reader can do all kinds of stuff. It can provide highlights, it can provide more information, it can provide sounds. That's all for the screen reader to do. All your website needs to do is make sure you've got that focus outline and you've got those labels that are there. And you make sure that the focus order is correct. That's all you really need to do, and everything else is up to the screen reader to do.
Great, thank you again for answering that question, Adeline. Next question here is, what was the name of the feature you mentioned that minimizes the language when testing the screen reader?
So that is, that's the speech viewer, and there's a couple, like every screen reader is going to do it a little bit differently. Syed, I don't know if you've used the speech viewer recently, but on NVDA, which is the screen reader we've used for all of the demos, you can just find in the user guide, look for the speech viewer. And it's going to be similar for the other screen readers as well. And that will pop up a little box that has the text in it. Again, all of them are going to work a little bit differently, but for NVDA, it's called Speech Viewer, and it pops up a little box that you can move around.
And I believe it's for JAWS, it's speech history or something that is available.
Great. Make a note of this, put it in the chat. Thank you for that. I did see this question, Renee. I will give that question to Josie, but Josie, if you want to add more to this information, the question was, will you be sending out information about the additional trainings? So William made a note about that earlier. Yes, that information will be sent out to all registrants. It is in a work in progress, but we will send out information like that to anyone who is interested. Josie, you want to add anything to that? Maybe a timeline?
Surely. So here's what's going to happen, friends. each of the RSA PTIs, and hopefully you know who yours is, will be getting a time slot. I'm going to be working with AFB and that RSA PTI to find a time that works. And then your RSA PTI can send information about when your region's slot is to look at website. And so it's going to be kind of trickling down from your RSA PTI. So just keep your eyes open for that. If there are non-parent center groups on here, I would honestly recommend that you reach out to AFB directly if you feel that you want to set something up on your own. It's definitely worth it. I know personally, and as was mentioned by our presenters, we had no idea that one of our fields for registration wasn't accessible. And so these are things that are constantly changing, constantly needing updated. And there is never a time that AFB or anyone's gonna be like, okay, you're perfect, you're done. This is something that's going to change and grow, and that's okay. It's just about continuous monitoring, checking and fixing, and having that open dialogue with people that use your site, that use these accessibility features. Any final questions?
Thank you, Josie.
We have a few more minutes. Yeah, absolutely.
This is Josie. This is Josie. No, that was Josie. This is Johan. And we do have one question here in the chat. This looks like the last questions, but there is some time. I'm thinking budgets. We would want to make sure we have the technology to support this type of accessibility. Any guidance on how we can best plan? And that's how the question was started. I am thinking budgets.
Matthew, if you're here, this might be a great question for you to chime in.
Sure. Okay. It says I'm not muted. Is it true this time?
That is true.
Yes.
All right. Excellent. We're off to a good start. I would say two things. Number one is most, if not everything, that I think I've seen William and Syed present today in terms of tools and technology, if that's the word you're using, are all free, readily available. So those don't affect budget is the good news. And a lot of the training or a lot of the testing you can do, again, hopefully you, instead of taking our word for it, we proved it today. Things like the, how much you can gain by doing keyboard testing, which again, all you have to do is prevent yourself from being tempted to use your mouse, and you can do that, or open a free screen reader and put focus on something. And is it saying in the speech what you think it should say that makes sense? All those things can be done very, very low cost and agilely. But above that, which I understand is probably behind the question, is our advice to you always, the biggest thing that can impact your budget is start early. Account for accessibility and inclusion as early as possible in your process. It should be a part of if you're doing a web redesign, a big red flag is if you don't specifically consider accessibility as part of the discovery conversation. That should let you know that you're going to gain that debt somewhere down the road. And accessibility does not have to be expensive or scary. A lot of it, as William showed, and Syed, is a solved problem, we like to say. But in reality, the longer you kick it down the road, and when you try to retrofit accessibility into a design, and one that's had been iterated on multiple times, it does become much more complex and unfortunately much more expensive. So that's our two pieces of advice: is take advantage of the free resources, which are abundant these days, which is great. It was not the case years ago. And incorporate these considerations as early as possible into your processes, and that will save you immense budget in terms of both time and money.
Thank you, Matthew. That is all the questions I see in the chat at the moment. But participants, you can unmute yourself if you wish to ask a question. If not, I will hand it over to Josie.
Thank you all. I'm going to pause for just a moment to see if any questions come through. But as Matthew just mentioned, we at Raise, we knew that we wanted to do an upgrade on our website, and I also knew from some insight from a partner who uses a screen reader. He's one of the RIA's advisory partners. I knew our site wasn't accessible, and I knew I didn't want to retrofit. And so we brought AFB in to go through our upcoming website, make suggestions on what platform to use, and that will save us in the long run time, energy. So I'm really excited for that. I'm just reading through the chat. And we are fully I'm excited that you guys are on this call, because that means that you are committed to access, and that's the first step, is being committed to it. So not seeing any other questions. I
have a quick question.
Oh, great.
It's about and Yvonne is on here, so she could probably name it. But we have a feature that we just added to our new website that makes it accessible. You can change, the font and size and contrast and things like that. And how far does that go for making a site accessible? As far as using like Waves or one of those features might pull up some things, but it doesn't completely cover all aspects. But where does that lie? Those type of features that you can add to your site. And Yvonne, I don't know what the name of the little widget that we have that people can access and help navigate the site in a way that's more user-friendly for them.
The widget is UserWay.
Okay.
I typed it in as well in case that helps. Yep.
Yeah. Matthew, do you got thoughts on this as well? I know we have a lot of thoughts. I have to rein myself in.
Right.
I think where we could be the most helpful here with just keeping it brief would be maybe, William, if you want to give examples of a couple of the different types of tools in this space. There's things from like was outlined here that can just allow people some additional functionality, like changing font sizes and color schemes that might not have their own assistive technology in place, to the other end of the extreme where there's companies that are promising add-ons for your website that can actually fix true accessibility problems that you have, which, as you can probably assume, we're going to tell you, you should not be fooled by that type of thing. There is no substitute, as was said early in this presentation, for doing the work and actually doing the testing. But maybe if you give a couple examples, William, because there's a lot of spectrum in that space, and all the tools aren't necessarily bad.
That's right. So some of them just provide things like font size changes and colors. And if you test that and it's working on your site, that's fine. Some of them purport to actually remediate your site, and some of them go so far as to guarantee that your site is 100% accessible. Those need to be very carefully examined, and the only way to do that is to enable it on your site and then test it thoroughly to make sure that everything is working, because we have tested a lot of sites that have put on one of those tools, and it's actually made things worse. Sometimes it makes it better, but sometimes it makes it worse, and sometimes it's a mixed bag. So really, you can use that if you'd like, but you have to still take responsibility for accessibility start to finish and test what the experience is like with it on. In our experience, the ones that try to actually fix things for a screen reader actually tend to make the experience more sluggish and a little bit less intuitive for a screen reader user. But we're not going to say we would love for there to be a solution that did that. That would be great. As advocates, we would love to be totally irrelevant in the space, but we are not irrelevant yet, and it requires a lot of diligence to ensure that you're not enabling something on your site that's actually making things worse.
I'm just going to quickly add, from my personal experience, the UserWay provides an accessible menu, and that menu isn't accessible on the mobile. That was my personal experience very recently. I was not able to select some of the submenu items, not even literally I was not able to even access the menu to expand on the mobile. So that's
a great example, Syed. So I hope our answer wasn't too complicated, but they can do some good, but there is no magic button, as much as some of us wish there was, and maybe someday there will be. But don't be taken in by the sales pitches. There's no substitute for doing the testing like we walked through today. That's the only way you can really be sure.
Thank you so much.
There's another question, and I don't think we got to it. Is WordPress a better website platform versus Drupal for enhancing accessibility? Asking as we are looking to improve our website, and that question is coming up. So we want to make sure that we're making the best decision.
Oh, that's a great question. We actually did this a few years ago ourselves, and so we have lots of thoughts. The short answer is it doesn't matter. They both are fine. It's more about what you do with your themes, the way you implement your themes, the plugins you choose. That's going to determine what makes it accessible, not whether or not you're using WordPress or Drupal. It's more like if you are going to rely on some of like the visual builder tools that are in WordPress or some of the visual builders in Drupal, think about the whole stack from the top of what you want your content authors to do and the components that will be necessary to make that happen. That's where you can run into accessibility problems. Not necessarily, Drupal is better than WordPress overall, because that's not how it works. Plus, neither one of them care what the user experience or what the users are seeing. Like somebody goes to your site, nobody cares whether or not you're using WordPress or Drupal. It's all about what your theme is, the way that the HTML is rendered, and they can both render an identical site if you really want it to. So WordPress versus Drupal, both of them can be extremely accessible. We use Drupal. We evaluated WordPress. We went with Drupal because it fit our requirements better, but we definitely could have used WordPress just as easily. It's the communities are both very large, and there are other content management systems as well that can be fine as well. It all comes down to the way that your themes are implemented and the plugins you choose to use.
The people that are impacted the most, as William was saying, by that choice, for the most part, are the people tasked with building and maintaining the site moving forward.
Yep.
So things we would recommend you look at, even for some of the other smaller or lesser known CMS options, is like both Drupal and WordPress. They do have established accessibility communities, for example, since they both have open source components. So that can be really important because the best you can do is a snapshot based on today. And I think, as everyone on this call knows, technology is certainly not standing still. So things are going to change. Things are going to break at some point in different ways and different levels of impact. So that's one of our pieces of advice, is that when you're vetting them, once you've confirmed that they meet your requirements, that's another good sign to look for. Do they have a way to contact their maintainers or their communities? And if they have one specifically geared towards accessibility, that's an even better sign, because at some point you could find yourself either needing to engage to solve an imminent problem, or what we would prefer to see is a place to engage to make changes, maybe contribute out something that you've worked on that you've got feedback was inclusive. Because again, with a lot of these having an open source component, there's the opportunity to collaborate, to benefit from each other's advocacy and even development work, and best of all, a way to contribute back.
Okay, that appears to be the final question. Well, I want to thank AFB. I want to thank each one of you for not only presenting, but for those who have attended and had such great questions. This is a growing field, and we're so excited to be sharing this with you all. I ask you to please fill out the survey. And if you are not receiving RAISE's information, please go to the raisecenter.org and sign up for our listserv. Thank you, everyone. Have a good day.